Hello DevOps people, welcome to Full Stack Live, my weekly live coding session. Let's make this thing interactive, so don't be shy if there's anything you'd like to ask, if there's anything you'd like to give me feedback on, just pop into the chat and let me know. And if you don't have anything to ask, simply say hi and I'll be happy to see that I'm not doing this alone. Okay, so in today's session I'm going to continue working on an issue in my company's hosting dashboard, which will be changing the authorization layer in the application. It's a Ruby on Rails application, and as you do, I've started using, I started with using CanCanCan as the authorization gem, because that was the common thing a few years back. But I realized that CanCanCan has certain shortcomings, and that's why I'd like to replace it with a newer gem called Action Policy. And that's what I'm going to do. And I've already started work on this, and I'm going to continue on this today. All right. So how is everyone? I'm pretty good. I've just had a nap, and I need to get awake first. I hope this tea will help. Weather outside here in Bray is okay-ish, but not too bad, not too good. It's all right. Anyway, we'll be here for the next 1.5 hours anyway, so doesn't really matter. Okay, so let's see. So this is the issue I'm working on at the moment. The repository dashboard API is a private repository anyway. I'd like to do this in public. This is real work. This is work I need to do for my job as a part owner of a hosting company. And that's what I decided to do. Instead of building some generic project, I decided to actually work on real things. I think that'll make the stream a bit more interesting. So let's see, do I have a Tmux window open yet? No, I don't. I've recently rebooted this machine, so let's go to dashboard and start a new Tmux session. I'll immediately go ahead and start the Docker environment with Docker Compose. There is no Docker daemon, so let's start this. In the meantime, I'll see. Okay, we are in issue 448, which isn't this issue. This issue is 334. So let's see. At least it's a clean working tree. So let's check out issue 334, Action Policy. I've made it a habit always using the issue number as the leading part of the branch name. That way I can easily find work in progress. And so now we are in branch 334. And let's fire up VS Code. Docker should be running by now. I see the icon still moving, but let's go ahead and try if DC up already works. No, it's not yet ready. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is wait for Docker to start, then I'll start the Docker development environment, which contains the databases and all the stuff that's necessary, and an application container with my current application. I probably need to also build a new version of the application, because I've switched between two pretty different code bases. Let's see if this goes. Okay, Docker's up. Yeah, let's repeat that. In the meantime, you can let me know if the music in the background is too loud or if there's anything I need to change. Yeah, it can't start it. Action policy isn't in the sources, so we'll have to DC build app and start with building a current image of the application code. I'm sorry if I'm touching my nose that often. With spring, hay fever comes back, and that's annoying me a bit at the moment. Okay, that was pretty quick. Not that I'd complain, but... Okay. Well, this is starting... I'll quickly blow my nose, just a second. Yeah, okay, there. I'll have to remove a PID file, and let's try starting it again. Okay, now we're good. Let's run db-nuke to initialize the database. Getting set up is a bit of annoyance, but having everything compartmentalized in containers is worth it in the end. Now the test environment. Here we go. And that's where we left off last time, because let me see, rig test, there should be a rig test in the application. So I've replaced CanCanCan with action policy, but I'll have to change a few places where things aren't as they should be, because they still use parts of CanCanCan or things like that. And there's also a few Robocop things style issues. I guess I'll take care of the style issues later. Let's run rspec and see how things are in the... How can I not use rspec? Oh yeah, I need to prefix that with bundle exec. Here we go. I've already created an issue for these deprecation warnings before, so we'll ignore them for the time being. And here we go. Already starting with a few failures. Last time I struggled a bit with how to fix the old integration tests here, but by now I think I know how I'll deal with all these things. It's basically variations on a theme, so I'll be able to show you in a minute. I think it's mostly here in these model integration tests. Hey Slayer Darth. I'm fine, how are you? Just got up from a nap, had a nice Saturday so far. Everything's relaxed. And I'm happy to be back on the air and happy to see you're with me again. Came off the treadmill, man. Don't make me envious. Yeah, I need to do something about my fitness as well. I'll probably take a longer, brisk walk later to get some air. Bad news? What's happened? Can't run Docker on Windows. Well, can you run anything on Windows? 4 gigabytes. No, not nearly. Not nearly. You need the VM that runs the Linux, that runs the Docker. So that's hard with 4 gigabytes. Heck, I had to upgrade my Mac here to 32 gigabytes of RAM to really work comfortably, because 16 sometimes just didn't cut it. Okay, here we go. So you can see, oh yeah, that's where I left off last time. The specs for the policies themselves, and that's. Oh, you were trying to run a Windows image on Docker. How does that work? Inside Docker? That's very strange, isn't it? Why would someone do that? Okay, spec policies. Where are the policies? They are here. Yeah, okay. Okay, so that's one of the files I fixed last time, or after my last live stream, I think. I'm still not happy about using let here to initialize test information. Sorry. But I'll leave that here as a style to be improved later. But at least these actual tests here are straightforward and easy to read, because we create a policy here and then we have our expectations in single examples. And so here, for example, we test that the policy, if we apply the read check, is true if we try to read, so for example here, the cluster. Oh no, the auxiliary domain, of course, it's the aux domain policy spec, of course. So that's pretty clean here, and that's the pattern I'd like to apply to all these policies. And here, for example, it complains about the database policy that's down here, and it doesn't quite look as good. So we'll have to do a bit of work here. Let's catch up on chat. It's because I already run Apache on my Windows laptop through Windows subsystem for Linux. Yeah, that does make sense. So I wanted to learn .NET. I was looking to run it IIS through Docker. Didn't want to get confused trying to run 2 web servers on the same machine. That makes sense. That's why I decided to run everything in Docker that's development related. I don't have a local Postgres database, for example, or the dashboard here also needs a Redis database, and that's why I decided to run everything in Docker. I can show you the Docker Compose file here. So what we're running is the application container, we run a Postgres container, a Redis container, and a Chef server, because the dashboard communicates with Chef, which is our system configuration management software. And that's nice and clean when it runs. But I'm not sure how I go about it if I were to run, say, IIS. I'd probably run it in a virtual machine, something like VirtualBox or something similar, and not try to get Docker into the picture as well, because I don't think Docker will really help you here. Doesn't? How do you run IIS in Docker? Because Docker is basically a Linux kernel, or provided by it's a Linux machine in rough terms. Didn't want to get confused trying to run 2 web servers on the same machine. Not enough RAM. Yeah. Can't imagine Macs being used as production servers. Oh yes, they are. Simply go to macstadium.com. They are a Mac hosting company. You can rent Macs as managed machines there. You can run Windows containers on Docker. Okay, I didn't know that. Never thought about it, to be honest, but that's interesting, and I wonder how that's working technically. But let's focus on our tasks here first. So, I got a lot of Robocop warnings here as well. And Robocop is right, everything is indented. Why is that? We don't have the frozen string literal true comment, so that resolves this. Context description should start with when, with, or without. So let's fix this. When user owns the website, it should allow access when and when. That gets rid of a few more. Then we have example has too many lines. That's something we'll need to fix later. Do not use should when describing your test. Yeah, that's right. How did I phrase it here? I say when user owns the cluster, it allows reads. So let's do that. It allows management in this case. I'm checking the manage check here. And here it's the same. No, it's the opposite. It doesn't allow management. And here it allows management. That's that. Macstadium have stolen the Stack Overflow logo? Have they? Macstadium.com. M with this half circle. How does this Stack Overflow logo look like? Well, yeah, there's a similarity, but there's only so many geometric configurations you can use in a logo, aren't there? Okay, so that's that. And one trading black line. Easy to fix as well. So the thing is, it actually does not work as intended. So let's run RSpec on this single file. And there's a requirement missing, require Rails helper. Do we include another? Yeah, we do also include the action policy test helper. And the last part actually fails. Undefined method reasons for nil class. Setup is the same every time, except probably yeah, the user here is an admin. Taking a look at our company GitHub. No, we don't offer PHP 5. We've recently retired all PHP 5 and we're only running PHP 7. So, just a second. Okay, so let's take a peek here. Don't actually check admin rights in the aux domain policy here. How about the cluster policy? Here we go. We also use build stopped with user and admin trait. Huh, okay. The strange thing is it says undefined method reasons for nil class, so we use one of these crappy shared hosting providers, a type that offers reseller hosting. Yeah, okay, there's many of them. And sometimes I find that the site rendering is broken and I can't see anything in the error logs. Yeah, that depends on PHP settings in part. If things get even logged or if they just get dumped to the web browser or things like that. I just updated the PHP interpreter version in the htxs file from PHP 5x to 7x and the issue disappears. Yeah, that's what you should do anyway, because PHP 5 isn't supported in any way anymore. There aren't any security updates for PHP 5 anymore, and so it's actually time to drop it. Okay, so we build a cluster, we build a user, that is not admin, we create a website, we create a database, and we create a policy based on this database and the user, and we expect the policy call to manage to equal to, which it looks like it should work. It's basically the same thing we do here, isn't it? However, here we have have a role admin. I'd like to use the admin trait here. Since we are already using a factory, I don't want to have these implementation details here. It's the same as with the cluster policy. Interesting. Why doesn't it really show work? I actually don't know too much about your customer solutions. Do you give them full SSH control over their server, or can it be limited to something like SFTP? It is limited because it's a managed hosting platform, so we can't really offer a service level of a certain kind if we let people configure the servers themselves. So we don't offer a root access, for example. We don't actually allow SFTP access to the website code. You use Git to deploy your code. The reason is that our hosting platform is a distributed hosting platform. So your application can run on as many servers as you like with a load balancer in front. And so having people making local changes to the code on a single server doesn't really make sense. What we do is people push updates to their GitHub repository that we offer them, and then the code automatically gets deployed to all the application servers we run for them. And people still have SFTP access to their shared file system, where they store uploaded files, graphics and log files and things like that, but the code is completely managed through Git. Okay, so I think the allowed to call here fails. It's not that it returns the wrong result, it actually fails. That's something I'll have to look into. Allowed to manage record website does fail. Where's this allowed to call anyway? Allowed to. It's in the policy, of course. So let's take a look at the policy. Database policy. Okay, so we check the records website. So in this case, for the database policy, we take the database and fetch the associated website, and then we try to check if the user is allowed to manage the website. Then we infer that the user is also, of course, allowed to manage the database. And this might fail for some reason, but why does it? Not sure if build stopped is enough here, or if things change when we use actual create, because build stopped doesn't necessarily, well, it does not get persisted to the database. And maybe it's just not enough to use build stopped here. Even though it seems to work fine for the other two test examples, but I think it just... Oh no, here we are. When user is an admin, it allows management. Now it does work, and I think we are onto something here. Even though I really don't like to have to access the database for each and every test example, but it might be necessary. I'm thinking about mocking a few of these things, but I'm not sure if that really buys us anything. I can only assume that it's because the associations here are so nested, because the database needs an associated website which needs to belong to a cluster, which in turn has a company, and we even need to associate the user with the company that owns the cluster, that runs the website, which contains a database. So it might simply be that create is necessary here. Again, we have when user does not own the cluster, doesn't allow management, and we have the same nil class here in database policy, website owner. I presume your customers, or at least their developers, use tools like Vagrant or Docker to replicate the live server locally. Yeah, something like that. Many of them use either Vagrant with VirtualBox or Docker to have a local test environment, so they can develop locally. We provide them also with staging instances that they can use to test their code in a realistic environment. And when everything looks good in the staging environment, they can simply do another git push to their production instance, and the website will, then the new code update will be up online. Alrighty, something that's I'm a bit confused, because that's not an issue I've encountered before with all the previous tests here. Even though I do create my models here, I use build stubbed for the cluster policy many times and it works. But maybe it's actually difference between the policies. So let's see, the aux domain policy, for example, uses allowed to manage record website. Okay, and the database policy, here, we have a pre-check, allow admins. Does the aux domain policy have that as well? It doesn't even. Okay, I guess it should. Not even sure if it's necessary, because we do test user admin or website owner. Okay, still we try to access record website and it fails. guess we can at least use build stubs on the user, because it's not supposed to be related to everything else. And it's strange that it works twice and the third time it doesn't. Oh, wait. Wait. So we call database policy manage, which then in turn checks if something is the website owner. Yeah, because my test user isn't an admin, so it calls website owner. The website owner checks allowed to manage record website. I immediately see why this breaks. Database policy line 19. Yeah, that's here. Okay, let's try some debug output here. So we have a website with example data. Does it have a company though? Or a cluster? Cluster ID 3. So it does have a cluster. Yeah, because we delegate that to record website. How does a website check management if a user is an admin? Or it simply passes it on up the stack or down the stack, however you look at it. We check if it's allowed to manage the records cluster, so the website's cluster. So we go to the cluster. And then we check if the user's company ID equals the cluster's company ID or the user as an admin. Okay, I'll probably put this first. And then we compare two IDs, which both should work. And that's the difference between these examples, isn't it? No, it's not. Well, the user is different all the time. First, the user is associated with the database indirectly. Here, down here, the user is an admin, and here it's completely separate. I still don't know why reasons for is called on a nil value here. Maybe we have to debug this a bit. So I guess it's time to actually use a debugger here. Oh, I've inserted it at the wrong place. I need to check it here. Here we go. So we should have a policy using database ID number 1, and it has a website ID, so website should be website ID 1. So that's that. And we should also have a user. Which has no company ID. Okay. The user we create is not associated with a company, and that might break us here. Well, we compare nil to some record in the cluster. The cluster's company ID is 1. So cluster company ID is 1, user company ID is nil. And I guess that's where this breaks, because have something here. Where does reason come in? Yeah, we try to write a authorization error. I guess that no, still doesn't make any sense. We could, just for fun, create a user with a company. There's a trait with company that we can use. So this user will have its own company. Now user has a company ID 1001. Still fails. Breaks in allowed to. I'm starting to think this might be an issue with action policy. Don't really want to pass the block, but there is no bug open for this, at least. Still, undefined method reasons. Not sure, I don't even get this issue. Reasons detail has been released in 020. Which one are we using here? .024. Okay. Reasons details. Okay, let's take a closer look. So we do have our policy, so we could check policy manage. So we get this exception. Policy manage. Checks if user is an admin, which is false, or if policy is allowed to manage record website. Here, which also fails. So when we call allowed to for record website, it fails. Because we check allowed to for the cluster. So how about I guess we need a new policy here. Don't we? I'm not sure we can even call it like this. There are policies for each model, right? So this is a database policy, and we initialize it with a certain database and a certain user, and then we call its manage method. How does action policy actually deal with these associations? So I guess allowed to. This is a predicate version of authorize. Return the truth, authorization succeed, and false otherwise. Okay, so we do fail for the cluster, which is the topmost check, right? Here we check if the user is an admin or if the user's company ID equals the records, though the cluster's company ID. So there's no delegation anymore. What happens if we remove this? Policy. Manage. Store files. If I create a new policy, let's say create a cluster policy. Cluster policy new cluster user, the same user and we ask the cluster policy if he's allowed to manage. It's false, because he's not an admin and he doesn't own the cluster. Okay. So at least this works. I guess it does make sense to use pre-checks everywhere, because admins should be able to do everything. So I'm gonna get rid of this. This time it failed in 2 places. It's getting stranger. Can policy manage? Method reasons. Let's create a website policy. Fails as well. Should use the pre-check. That's the thing that annoys me a bit with action policy. I've run into these issues quite a few times because documentation has been outdated, or behavior has changed and has not been documented, or things like that. And it always costs me quite a lot of time to fix this. And I just realized I'm answering the questions by Flipkick14. Hi, what is your impression of action policy? I still use CanCanCan for authorization. I wonder what the advantages of action policy are. Yeah, I'll tell you what my thoughts about it. In theory, I find it much more attractive than CanCanCan. That's why I'm busy replacing CanCanCan with action policy and struggling quite a bit. The reason why I'd like to replace CanCanCan is that I find the hash that is used to define all the authorizations quite obscure and opaque, so it's hard to tell what it means. And I found a few use cases where it makes it really hard to express authorization rules, especially for the case I'm having where authorization is based on a has many through association, and I like action policies approach much more because it uses actual Ruby code to express authorization rules, and that for someone who codes, I think this is much more straightforward. That's the theory, and the reality is that even though I have defined these quite simple rules, I'm still struggling to get my updated tests to work, because there is behavior that I don't expect, or I didn't understand quite correctly, or things like that. So in practice it seems to be harder to use, maybe because it's not as refined as CanCan and then CanCanCan were or have been. Yeah, so far I have been able to resolve the issues that I had, but it always took me quite a bit of time, and that's what's annoying me at the moment. That I'm spending a lot of time filtering out the reason why I get this strange error message that doesn't tell me anything. Okay, new try. We have a policy, and when I call it, I get an exception. It's not really a shut up, Alexei. Okay, thank you. Your first impression is that it really looks cleaner. It does, and I hope I'll get it to work, because it'll make things so much easier, because I can simply build as complex authorization code as I want, but as long as it's understandable, the authorization rules are understandable. That's the hope, and there's always hope, isn't there? So let's see. We delegate this to the associated website. So if I create a website policy that uses the website with the current user, I should be able to check if this user can manage, and I get the same reason. So if I create a cluster policy, for the cluster I already have with the same user, and ask this one to manage, it actually returns false. So I guess it might be the website policy that's broken. Website cluster should be the same as cluster, right? Yeah, that's correct. using something basic like this. Wait. See, within a single week I already forgot that I had inserted these apply calls here. So I'm not actually calling the read check directly on the policy, but I'm using the apply method here. And I do that in aux domain. I don't do it in cluster, obviously, and I don't do it here. So I think aux domain was the final thing I worked on last week. I got that correct with using apply here. And by picking database policy from the failing tests, I thought it would be the next thing, so cluster and company would be okay, but they aren't. So I guess, oh no, if I'm wrapping this in apply calls, come on, that's why I've lost 90 minutes of work. Because they did change that over time for good reasons, I think. Because that creates some kind of context. Instead of calling rules directly, it's better to call the apply method, which wraps rule method with some useful functionality such as caching, pre-checks, and failure reasons tracking. And that's why I get the error message that reasons is a nil object. Oh, I could scream. This really makes me angry now. See, that's what I meant. Let's run the test first. Let's run the test first. But I'd expect it to work now. And that's exactly what I meant with I was able to resolve it eventually, but I lost a lot of time figuring things out. Of course, now it works. I could scream. So let's go ahead and fix the other two policies up here, so at least the first 4 policy specs here work. Policy, so let's we'll have to wrap this. What? Play? No, apply. Could copy this. 90 minutes lost. But well, okay, let's go back to Stoicism and say we learned something. We did learn something, which is that these older tests need updating. Hey QP, why did I choose action policy? When I built this application, I chose CanCanCan, as everyone does, I guess. But over time, it became more difficult to express more complex authorization rules, because CanCanCan uses this Ruby hash to build a kind of authorization matrix, and I think that's far less straightforward than action policy's approach, where you write policy code like this here, where I can say, okay, I have certain controller verbs here, like new and create, and they simply return a Boolean value, and that expresses if the current user may use this verb. So everyone can call new and create. Only admins may call delete, and admins or owners of a cluster, because this is the cluster policy, owners of a cluster may manage this object, and I've aliased show, edit, update the other verbs in the controller to manage. So it's easy to read, but if my authorization rules get more complex, which they are going to be, then I can simply extend my Ruby code here, and as long as I understand my code, I understand the authorization flow. And I think that's much easier than trying to build a hash with nested hashes and stuff like that. Yeah, it is definitely inspired by Pundit, but there are subtle differences. I was about to use Pundit when I discovered action policy, and I thought, okay, action policy is even more current than Pundit is, because Pundit hasn't been updated in quite a while, I think. Yeah, so action policy does look promising. However, first I had to update my application to Rails 5, because action policy only works with Rails 5. And then I've ran into multiple issues where documentation hasn't been updated, or things changed, like in today's session, where that and these changes, I wasn't aware of these changes, so I had to find out the hard way what actually did change. And so it cost me a lot of time to get things working. I guess if I don't forget by next week what I did today, fixing the other test should be okay, and I hope that my CanCanCan replacement can be finished by next week. But yeah, I hope action policy is worth all the effort. Otherwise, I'll be quite sad having sunk so much time into this. So let's go ahead and make a few more subtle changes to the stuff I've changed today. For example, let's copy this frozen literal magic comment, so Rubocop won't complain about this at least. That's easy. Low-hanging fruit. in here. So cluster policy can be fixed. That's done now, but I'll use the new pre-check as well for cluster policy. So I don't have to repeat user admin all the time. Which makes this rule even more simple. Manage is if the user's company ID is equal to the cluster's company ID, and that's straightforward. And there's a special exception for admins that applies everywhere anyway, so we can get rid of the delete method here. Okay, that's that. Database policy has the missing string. Oops. Database policy, where is it? Here. And there should be. Where is it? It's that. So this is clean now, and the tests have still too many lines in their examples, and we have examples with more than one expectation. That should be changed as well. We can change the wording. Of the examples and the contexts. I have been using if, and I should use when for the contexts, and not use should, but simply say it allows access. It does not allow deletion. It does not allow access, and when there's an admin, it allows access. And now we have too many expectations. So we have to duplicate that, and well, okay. It allows management, that's one of the expectations, and it allows deletion. Okay, then we have this one here where it's basically the same. It allows. Do we even need new? I'm not sure, but okay. Let's say it allows calling new, and it allows calling create to everyone. That's the basic thing that we'd like to express here. Yes, it is Rubocop for specs. I've enabled this just recently, and that's why I also have another branch in here that still has about 300 Rubocop warnings. There is an Rubocop RSpec that applies the same rigor to tests as Rubocop does to normal application code. And I'm quite happy about that, but it created a lot of work for me, and so I started out, I think, with over 500 Rubocop warnings in my tests, because I built this application, when did I start it? 3 or 4 years ago, So I didn't really know much about RSpec at that time, and I simply copy and pasted stuff from other people. And on the other hand, I think I'm learning a lot from Rubocop about writing clean code, and since I also like to learn to code clean tests, I'm more than happy to indulge Rubocop RSpec here, but not maybe not during today's session, because the focus of this issue is action policy and not cleaning up my style. However, if I can simply fix this by copying methods or examples here, that's all right. So, for example, Rubocop also complains about examples that are too long, longer than 5 lines of code, and that requires refactoring, and won't do that during while working on the action policy issue. Here I drop this, and here I drop this, and that should resolve everything in here. No, it does not. Don't repeat descriptions, so yeah. That's that. Cool. Okay, we can close this. So basically, my database policy spec should work. You're right, 2 expectations is pretty reasonable for this test, and it saves time because you don't need to create dependencies twice. Yeah, I might want to think about this, if I blindly follow this, or if I make intentional exceptions here. But yeah, as I said, that's for another day when I switch to another branch where I've resolved these style issues. Build stopped is pretty fast, but thanks for reminding me. While trying to work this out, I replaced my build stopped calls with create calls because I was afraid this was the reason it broke, but it wasn't. So let's go back to build stopped here. Here we already use build stopped. Here we use build stopped, and I guess we should be able to use build stopped here as well. Oops. Okay, so let's go ahead and run these different specs. Let's start by database policy. Yeah, I try to avoid calling create if it's not necessary. Sometimes I get insecure if I shouldn't be using create, but often I simply do an experiment, and if it works with build stopped, I'm happy, and only then, if it doesn't, I'll switch to create. Okay, so database policy does work now. Let's go to company policy. And it does not work. Okay, but that's because I did not include the necessary test files. I guess the same applies to cluster policy. Aux domain should work because I got that working last Saturday. Where's the spec? I've closed the spec here. So by the way, sorry for the empty black space on the right. That's where I normally have the chat, but my OBS had issues with including web content and kept crashing on me. So that's why I removed it, and I'll try to bring it back, of course. Okay, company policy does work. And cluster policy should work as well. I guess I could have finished these tests if I hadn't missed this apply call here. Undefined method delete in cluster policy. That's what I removed, didn't I? And I'm actually calling delete somewhere here. Okay, so let's go back to the cluster policy. And delete, I guess, can also be... No, delete should be left to admins, I guess. Okay, so let's bring it back. Actually, delete shouldn't be called at all, because we simply switch cluster's status to deleted instead of actually deleting it from the database. But anyway, now this works as well. Okay. So at least I've fixed these policies and I've learned what I need to update here. Well, I guess that's the price I have to pay for leaving this issue laying around for almost a year or so. When did I create this issue? Yeah, in May 2018. And I did some work on this over time, and then I put it on the back burner, and now I'll have to relearn new things and check what's changed since I did work on this. And so kids don't do this at home, I guess. Do quick changes and get them over with, and then you'll don't have to start again with learning stuff. Okay, so I guess that's today's lesson. Don't wait with finishing something until you forgot everything about it, and you'll be fine. So let's check this in. Fix more policy action. Policy tests. Okay. Authorization checks now need to be wrapped in. Apply. Calls to work properly, exclamation mark. Also use pre-check where possible. QP, I think I even saw a gem for finding redundant create in tests. Test evilmartians.io factory doctor. Interesting, let's have a look. Factory doctor. One common bad pattern that slows our tests down is unnecessary database manipulation. Consider a bad example. Create user, and then we'll check it to not be valid. Yeah, of course, we can just use build stuff because persisting it really doesn't make sense. And it helps you identify such bad tests. Interesting. Currently, Factory Doctor works only with Factory Girl, Factory Bot. That's not a problem because I'm using Factory Bot. Nice. I like it. Thanks, QP. Oh, that's why I recognized Evil Martians. I thought, well, I've seen this before, and that's because it's from the same guys. Okay, perfect, good stuff. Cool. Yeah, let's go to GitHub and give this a nod. Actually, that soothes me a bit because it increases my confidence that the people who are building action policy do know what they're doing and are actively trying to do something and build good code. And it's just that it's a bit rough around the edges and documentation is lagging behind sometimes. Or even, which is also treacherous, sometimes documentation is too far ahead because they seem to be creating their documentation website here from the master branch, and so sometimes I already had cases where things were described in the documentation that weren't even published as a gem yet. So you only got them by actually pulling the master branch. Oh, my little one is angry, so I guess I get better back to my family now. All right, so I've been streaming for almost 2 hours now, and I guess it's time to wrap up. I'll be back next Saturday at 3:30 p.m. GMT. If I get to do some more coding during the week, I'll do a spontaneous live stream. So make sure to follow the stream so you get a notification. And I'll also upload a recording of this session to YouTube. You can find my YouTube channel at youtube.fullstacksensei.com, and make sure to subscribe there as well. And for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.